Have you ever seen something on television and sensed the air in the room shift? Like you weren't just observing entertainment anymore, but something much more tangible? That's precisely what transpired one night when Mark Wahlberg participated in what was meant to be an ordinary late-night sit-down interview. You know the type, easy going on and some chuckles, a few plugs for his movies. But in a matter of minutes, it became apparent that this was not going to be one of those warm, fuzzy moments. Something was amiss, and then it all fell apart. Now, most of us have seen our share of talk show dust-ups over the years, awkward exchanges, a few cold stares. But this was different. It wasn't just a clash of personalities. It was a full-blown reckoning. Two grown men, each carrying the weight of his past, facing off in a way that left an entire audience stunned into silence. What began as a straightforward promotional stint escalated into something much more profound and considerably less pleasant. A discussion that ought to have been about story and redemption evolved incrementally and agonizingly into a public examination of one man's lowest moment. And I'll be honest, seeing it happen, it brought something to mind. That feeling you get when someone confuses vulnerability with weakness, when truth is met with derision instead of mercy. Perhaps you've experienced it too. That pinch of attempting to do right, only to have it tossed back at you. Wahlberg emerged that evening, willing to answer tough questions. He wasn't avoiding his past. He entered into that studio ready to discuss it freely, to talk about how he's attempted to change, how he's reconciled, and in our world today, where we so infrequently have the chance to witness public figures owning their errors with humility, that alone was invigorating. But the host, let's just say he took a different path. Now here's the thing, we all like a bit of late-night snark every now and again. It's part of the appeal. A bit of teasing, a bit of wit, it livens things up. But there is a fine line between wit and cruelty, between being clever and being reckless. And on this night, that line was crossed. What ensued was not funny. It wasn't even awkward in the typical way. It was raw, personal, and to many viewers, heartbreaking to behold. Because this wasn't about a movie star losing his cool or a host having a terrible evening. This was about what happens when someone who has worked so hard to get past it gets pulled back into the past, not for understanding, not for insight, but for sport. And it asks some hard questions about what we demand of the people who hold the mic, about how we treat one another when we figure no one's really listening, and about whether we've evolved as a society or if we're just still waiting for someone to slip so we can say, ah, see, I knew it. For many of us who've lived long enough to watch people get up, fall down, and get back up again. This struck a chord because we know how difficult it is to grow, how much courage it requires to own up to making a mistake, and how quickly all of that can be erased by one harsh joke. Wahlberg didn't storm out. He didn't have a tantrum. He stood firm, spoke clearly, and most importantly, he remained human. That quiet, steely strength, that's what resonated with people. And then the dust settled, and it was evident something had changed. Social media was abuzz, certainly, but not with outrage for engagement, with consideration. Folks were discussing decency, about respect, about what it takes to be a good human being in a world that so frequently celebrates the opposite. And perhaps that's what made this moment so memorable. It wasn't about Wahlberg or Kimmel. It was about all of us, how we decide to interact with each other, particularly when the cameras are rolling and stakes are high. So what really happened that night behind the polished desk and studio lights? Why did a simple interview turn into one of the most talked about confrontations in late night history? And what does it say about the state of our media, our expectations, and our humanity? Well, that's what we're here to talk about. Let's get a closer look at the evening Mark Wahlberg entered a studio anticipating a conversation and left having altered the conversation altogether. What began as a normal late-night promo segment soon escalated into something no one in the studio or sitting at home saw coming. Mark Wahlberg's visit to Jimmy Kimmel Live veered sharply from relaxed small talk into outright confrontation, culminating in pandemonium that had security removing the Hollywood star from the set. The audience had settled in, anticipating the usual laughs, light jabs, and movie talk. After all, Wahlberg had visited Kimmel's show plenty of times before. Usually, they'd trade friendly banter about his latest action flick or his Boston upbringing. But from the moment Mark walked onto the stage that night, something felt off. Kimmel began with his typical monologue, but there was a snap in his voice, a bit more bite than he normally had. When he brought out Wahlberg, it wasn't the typical warm introduction. Instead, he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mark Wahlberg, who's here to explain his new film, and hopefully not beat someone up backstage." The audience laughed, but if you were paying attention, you could have seen Wahlberg's smile falter. He'd endured his share of jokes about his troubled history over the years, but Kimmel's delivery rang a little false to him. Nevertheless, Mark maintained his cool, gliding into the guest chair with ease. So, Mark, Kimmel began, reclining in his chair with that signature smirk, you've got another action movie coming out. At 53, when do you think you'll hang up the tough guy act? Wahlberg's jaw clenched ever so briefly. Well, Jimmy, he replied, his voice steady, as long as people still want to watch true stories about real people fighting through real adversity, there'll always be a market for that type of movie. True stories, Kimmel echoed, leaning forward with a sneering smile. Yeah, sure. Because nothing cries true like a millionaire from Dorchester acting like he's still tough from the streets. The audience fell silent at once. Even the house band seemed uncomfortable. This was no longer good-natured joking. There was an edginess to Kimmel's voice, a colder, sharper edge. Wahlberg pushed forward, his voice unwavering but unquestionably harder. Jimmy, I've never attempted to conceal who I am. I've been open about my history, the errors I committed, and the work I've done to right the wrong. Oh yes, Kimmel fired back, not giving up. The redemption arc. Let me ask you, Mark, do you think the people you hurt all those years ago watch your movies and go, great, the guy who gave me permanent vision damage is now worth $300 million. You could have heard a pin drop. Kimmel had just referenced Wahlberg's 1988 conviction of assault on live television. It hit like a gut punch. Mark's publicist quickly grabbed her phone backstage. This was not just embarrassing, it was bordering on uncouth. Wahlberg's face stiffened, and his Boston accent thickened as his anger flared. Jimmy, that's not fair. I was 16. I paid my dues. I apologized directly to the people I hurt, and I've spent more than 3 decades trying to become a better man. Kimmel did not relent. Have you, though? Kimmel leaned in, obviously taking a bit too much pleasure in how uncomfortable things were becoming. Because from my seat, he said with a self-satisfied smile, it just seems like you became wealthy and famous enough for folks to no longer care about what you did. The crowd wasn't laughing now. In fact, they weren't saying anything. The studio was utterly silent. Producers behind the cameras scrambled to determine whether they should continue to roll tape or go to commercial. Even veteran cameramen looked confused. Wahlberg's hands were also shaking lightly, not because of fear, but from the simple exertion it was taking him to remain calm. You know what, Jimmy? He said, standing up slowly from his chair, his voice low, but seething with intensity. I didn't come here to discuss a movie tonight, a movie that employed hundreds of people, that puts money into actual families, that shares a message of second chances. But you want to make this a joke about the biggest error of my life, for the sake of a cheap laugh. For the first time, Kimmel looked like he realized he'd pushed it too far. But even then, his pride wouldn't let him back down. Hey, he shrugged, I'm just asking what people want to know. Isn't that what journalism is about? Wahlberg's tone changed, his voice rising slightly. Journalism? He exclaimed. This isn't journalism, Jimmy. This is a hit piece. And from someone who built a career making fun of people who can't clap back, it's rich. The air in the studio was stifling now. The crowd could be seen squirming uncomfortably. Some changed position, wondering if they were still watching a comedy program or seeing a genuine meltdown in professional courtesy. Security had slipped in closer, sensing that things were getting out of hand. Kimmel's face darkened a shade. He'd had his share of difficult guests over the years, but Wahlberg's barely contained, razor-sharp anger was something he'd never experienced. Mark wasn't yelling. Mark wasn't being a scene stealer. But that unnerving, silent focus, that was more intimidating than a full-fledged meltdown. Mark, Kimmel said at last, voice dropped lower, why don't we just take a break? No, Jimmy, Wahlberg answered, not waning. Don't take a break. Let's continue the discussion. The lights in the studio appeared to intensify at that moment as the two males eyed each other across the table. Kimmel's normal charm and confidence were obviously beginning to wear thin, but his pride refused to let him back down. He looked down nervously at his cue cards, then up at Wahlberg, who remained standing, towering over him, every inch the picture of cool control with storm clouds brewing in his eyes. Hey, Mark, Kimmel persisted, attempting to lighten the mood. I think you're getting a little sensitive here. This is a comedy show. This is what we do. If you can't take a couple of jokes about your history, maybe Hollywood isn't for you. It was the sort of remark that falls with a thud, and, in this instance, a poisonous one. The room froze. A few of the people in the audience literally gasped aloud. Even Kimmel's veteran band leader shook his head slowly, clearly sensing the scope of the blunder. Wahlberg's face froze into absolute stillness, cold, unreadable. Sensitive, he echoed. Jimmy, he paused for a beat. Let me tell you something about sensitivity. I was a 16-year-old kid from a broken home. I was on cocaine. I was mad at the world. And I did things I regret terribly. I hurt people. And I carry that weight every single day. Then his voice fell to a low, hard tone. But what I do not have to live with is some Brooklyn privileged comedian telling me about my life, while he sits behind a desk worth more than most people make in a year. Wahlberg's retort struck a chord with the audience. As soon as he labeled Jimmy Kimmel privileged. It was unmistakable that it hit home. Kimmel's face grew redder still, and his tone took on an edge for the first time. Privileged? He retorted. I earned what I got. Just like you claim to have done. Say I did. Wahlberg took a step closer to the desk, his tone rising. I didn't say anything, Jimmy. I lived it. While you were out making prank calls on radio shows, I was trying to get to school without getting shot. While you were cozying up to celebrities for interviews, I was pouring concrete at 4 in the morning just to afford acting classes. The studio was completely silent. Tension had shifted from uncomfortable to palpable. Each member of the audience was frozen, totally captivated by what they were seeing. This wasn't the typical playful melodrama or scripted pyrotechnics for ratings. This was live. This was honest. Two men, both successful in their own right, engaged in a very public and very personal battle. Kimmel attempted to deflect with humor, emitting a laugh that was actually a nervous cough. Come on, Mark. You're making a big deal out of this. We're both performers. We both know how the game is played. Wahlberg's voice fell again, but this time it was even more menacing. A killer's calm. This isn't a joke to me, Jimmy, he said. My history isn't a punchline. The ones I harmed, those weren't characters in your routine. And all of the things I've done to correct all that, that's not funny material. Now Kimmel was sweating in plain sight. Under the intense studio lights, sweat beads formed on his brow. His writers in the control booth were flapping their arms at him through the glass, urging him to wrap it up, to shift the subject. Anything, but Jimmy couldn't hear or see them. He was pinned in a corner, nose to nose with an angry man who wasn't moving. Wahlberg leaned forward a little. You want to know what's actually funny, Jimmy? You get up here every evening making fun of other people's lives, of their struggles, of their worst fumbling errors. But when did you ever risk something real? When did you ever risk anything? And then, just when Kimmel might have backed away, he crossed the line. At least I never blinded anyone in a racially motivated attack. The words strike like a thunderclap. The studio turned ice cold. Even the camera operators ceased movement, not sure whether to continue filming or simply drop the cameras. It wasn't just inappropriate, it was horribly cruel. Wahlberg's whole body stiffened, his fists clenched at his sides. For a heartbeat, it felt like the world had stopped. No one breathed. Everyone was waiting, wondering if this was about to erupt into something far more serious. Then in a voice so quiet it barely registered at first, Wahlberg said, "Get up." Kimmel blinked. "What?" "I said," Wahlberg said again, louder this time. "Get up. Stand up and tell me that in person, like a man, not from behind your desk like a coward." Kimmel remained seated. His signature bravado, always present, was absent now. His voice caught slightly. "Mark, I think we should really take that break now." "Stand up!" Wahlberg bellowed, his voice carrying across the studio. A few audience members actually winced in their seats. "You want to discuss my past? You want to joke about the worst thing I've ever done in my life? Then be brave enough to say it to my face. Don't hide behind your little desk where you're safe." Kimmel's hands shook now, white-knuckled on the side of the desk, as the situation careened entirely out of his control. Security was in full alert by then, but it was a strange situation. They weren't working with a guest who was being physically violent. Mark Wahlberg was instead insisting on the host standing up and acting like a man. That complicated things. "You know what your problem is, Jimmy?" Wahlberg's voice rang out across the dead-quiet studio. "You've worked so many years behind the jokes and the sarcasm, you've forgotten how to be a person. You think because you're funny, you get to be cruel. Like the term entertainment gets you off scot-free." Kimmel, still visibly shaken, finally managed to speak, but his voice was smaller than usual. "I'm just doing my job, Mark." "Your job?" Wahlberg let out a short, humorless laugh. "Your job is to entertain people, not to tear them down like it's some sport. People tune in to feel good, Jimmy, not to become unwilling witnesses to your personal grudges." A shiver of whispers ran through the studio crowd. Some were visibly squirming. Others were checking their phones, already posting what they were watching happen in real time. The producers sitting in the control booth were engrossed in an intense debate. Cut to commercial or keep rolling with this scene. And then Kimmel got up. But it wasn't the assured action of an experienced host. It was uncertain, clumsy. Facing Wahlberg now, the difference was evident. Wahlberg stood with an earthy, authoritative presence, and Kimmel appeared smaller, shaken, and in doubt. "Do you think you're better than me?" Kimmel exploded, his voice breaking on a mixture of anger and despair. "You think just because you've made some movies and cut a few checks, that pays for what you did? You think that makes you a saint or something?" Wahlberg shook his head. There was no anger there now, just disappointment. "I didn't say I was superior to anyone, Jimmy," he responded, "but I do know the difference between responsibility and taking advantage. I know what it means to take responsibility for your own mistakes versus using another man's agony as joke material. That's when Kimmel lost it. "Oh, spare me the philosophy," he sneered. "You're an actor. You were lucky. You recite lines other people write and play a different person for a living. Don't give me lectures about authenticity." The insult lay there like a cloud of smoke, and that, for many in attendance, was the last straw. Several of them stood and quietly started making their way for the exit, obviously tired of what the host had degraded to at that moment. The whole atmosphere of the room had changed, from excitement to uncomfortableness to outright disgust. What began as entertainment had turned personal, bitter, mean. Wahlberg held his ground. He didn't elevate his voice. He didn't need to. "You know what, Jimmy?" he said, still with the calm tone but icy in its matter-of-factness. "You're right about one thing. I do read other people's lines, but at least when I'm acting a character, I confess, you've been acting a character for so long, you don't even know who you are in real life. Underneath the makeup and the cue cards." Kimmel's face had turned red. Veins stood out in his forehead. "Get out of here, Mark," he snarled. "Just get out." "Oh, now you want me to leave?" Wahlberg lashed back, his voice sharp. "After you ambushed me with personal jabs? After you attempted to embarrass me before a national viewing audience? Now you want to play like I don't belong here? Like I just happened to stumble onto your set by mistake?" Security had now completely encircled the stage, observing closely. They were prepared to intervene at any minute, but hadn't yet. Mark Wahlberg wasn't being physically violent. No threats, no yelling. Pure, concentrated words. And in a way, that made the moment land even harder. "You brought me here tonight, Jimmy," Wahlberg declared, his voice slicing through the thick air of the studio. "You invited me onto the show to discuss my work, to provide your audience with something worth watching. But instead of being a host and doing your job, you chose to tear me apart. For laughs." Kimmel was panting hard now, obviously shocked by what he had created. His cocky swagger was gone. "I was just asking tough questions," he attempted to recover some control. "That's what good interviewers do." Wahlberg emitted a hard, bitter laugh. "Tough questions?" he echoed. "No, Jimmy. Tough questions have to do with the work, the craft, my choices as an actor, as a producer. What you did tonight? That wasn't an interview. That was ambush journalism with a laugh track." The studio was painfully silent. Each syllable resonated through the room like a stone in an empty well. Even the band had ceased to play. No fill, no cues, merely the raw sound of two adult men engaging in the kind of brutally candid confrontation that never, and perhaps should never, occurs on television. Wahlberg's tone became less harsh, yet the emotional burden became only more intense. "You know what's sad, Jimmy?" he said, his voice nearly soft now. "You're actually a talented guy. You're funny when you want to be. You've got charm. You've got presence. But along the way, you figured being mean was simpler than being witty." That line seemed to hit harder than anything else that had been uttered. Kimmel didn't respond immediately. His face twitched once, and for a moment his eyes appeared watery. Whether it was frustration, remorse, or something else, it was unclear. "Don't you even think about trying to psychoanalyze me?" Kimmel declared, his voice wavering under stress. "You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I've been through." "Right," Wahlberg whispered. "I don't. Because you use the jokes to hide behind. The sarcasm. That nice smile. You don't show anyone what you actually are. But me, I've been open about my errors, about my failures, and I've tried, really tried, to set them right." At that moment, the energy in the room changed once more. The confrontation had crossed into spectacle. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was unvarnished, unfiltered. Two public figures stripping away their personas and laying something raw, human, and intensely personal on the table. Abruptly, Kimmel banged his hand on the desk. The stinging impact resonated like a gun report, sending the crowd jumping. "Enough," he snapped. "This is my show, my cameras, my studio, my audience. You don't come onto my stage and tell me how to do my job." Wahlberg stepped back a small distance, not in fear, but because he was taken aback by the explosion. "Here it is," he said quietly, nearly sadly. "The true Jimmy Kimmel, not the nice guy, not the charming host, just an insecure bully who can't take being held accountable." His words dropped like a soft verdict, irrevocable, cutting, and incontrovertible. Kimmel's face paled. All the color washed right out of it in a split second, leaving behind a pale, shocked-looking mask. He looked around the studio, hoping against hope for backup, for support from his writers, his band, someone. But all he saw were empty stares, quiet disapproval, discomfort. No one was standing with him. "Now you want to know what's pathetic, Jimmy?" Wahlberg replied, his tone firm and steady, bearing the assurance of one who had no further proof to offer. "I came here tonight willing to be open. I was willing to speak openly about my past, about the lives I've damaged, about the efforts I've made to attempt to set it right. because that's what actual people do. They confront their errors. They attempt to learn. Kimmel opened his mouth, ready to reply, but nothing. His quick-witted sarcasm, the one thing he normally relied on, had deserted him. He simply stood there, deflated. The audience didn't stir. They were transfixed, but the moment had switched entirely. It was evident that a good number of them now firmly stood in Wahlberg's corner. But you, Wahlberg went on, pointing directly at the host, you didn't see honesty. You didn't see courage. You saw weakness. You saw an opportunity. And rather than met the moment, you attempted to turn the nadir of my life into a cheap joke, a punchline. Security continued to stand guard, vigilant but no longer troubled. Wahlberg hadn't uttered a threatening word or made an aggressive move. He didn't have to. What he was doing, publicly and forcefully challenging a host on his own turf, was far more damaging than any fight. And what's really unfortunate, Wahlberg continued, his voice increasing in volume, not with rage but with sincere dismay. These individuals didn't come here for this. Your viewers came to laugh, to enjoy a respite from their trouble. And what did they see? You taking a swing at someone who approached in good faith? You demonstrating to them how easy it is to be cruel and how difficult it is to be kind. The audience, shocked mere seconds earlier, started to applaud. Gradually at first, then louder. Not that they liked the theatrics, but because they knew great grace in the face of pressure. Wahlberg's integrity was louder than any insult anyone had hurled at him. Kimmel was finally able to get a word out, his voice little more than a whisper. Mark, I think maybe we both got a little carried away here. No, Jimmy, Wahlberg answered sternly. You got on a roll. I remained professional. I attempted to bring the conversation back around to why I was there. I gave you opportunity after opportunity to be kind, and every time you opted for cruelty. Kimmel turned toward the control booth in a silent plea, but his producers weren't coming to the rescue. They looked just as shocked and disappointed as the rest of the room. One was already on the phone, most likely speaking to network execs trying to figure out how to clean up the damage in real time. I think we're done here, Wahlberg said calmly, unclipping the mic from his shirt. This isn't the type of show I want to be on. And to be honest with you, you're not the type of person I want to work with. Kimmel attempted one final time. Mark, wait, can't we just... No, Wahlberg interrupted quickly. We can't just anything. You made your decision tonight, Jimmy. You decided to tear someone down rather than build them up. You decided to assault a guest instead of entertaining your audience. And now, you get to live with it. He passed the mic to a crew member who stood nearby and headed for the door. The applause increased again, this time louder, more supportive, almost purgative. And just as he was about to leave the stage, Wahlberg wheeled around once more. You know, Jimmy, Wahlberg hesitated, his tone firm but genuine. I hope you got something out of all of this, because if you don't, you'll be very isolated in this industry. And quickly, people in Hollywood may tolerate much, but not this. They will not stand for bullies who turn on their guests. With those last words, Mark Wahlberg walked away from the Jimmy Kimmel live stage. The host remained standing behind him, looking completely defeated. The crowd, still cheering, sat in stunned silence as the actor walked behind the curtain, and then the cheering ceased and an uncomfortable silence remained that engulfed the entire studio. Kimmel stood alone at his desk, looking down the exit. Producers hastily switched to a commercial break, rushing to manage the moment, but it was too late. In just moments, the drama of the encounter was erupting on social media. Mark Wahlberg was right started trending in a matter of seconds. Fans flooded online sites with praise for the actor, scores of them lauding the level-headed, direct manner in which he had managed what quickly became a deeply awkward and very public ambush. While all this was happening on live television, behind the scenes, it was hopping. Network executives were scrambling. They were having emergency meetings. It was unanimous. Jimmy Kimmel had crossed a big line, and the consequences were immediate. Advertisers started to pull their support from future shows. Publicists and talent reps began to cancel guest spots. No one wanted to have their client walk into that situation. Outside the studio, Wahlberg had a reunion with his publicist and security detail. How do you feel? His publicist asked tenderly. Wahlberg hesitated before responding. Disappointed, he replied candidly. I truly thought we were beyond this type of thing in our line of work. I believed we'd learn to treat people with respect no matter what they've endured. And that moment, raw and unedited and sincere, encapsulated what made this event so relatable for so many. It wasn't merely about two celebrities beefing. It was about something more. It revealed an uncomfortable reality in the showbiz industry. The propensity to monetize people's suffering into jokes, to trivialize their trials into viral videos, to overlook that at the end of every headline is a human soul. But it also revealed something else, that when a person insists on respect, truth, and honor, people will pay attention, and they will take your side. By morning, the showdown had reached a flashpoint, a turning point in late-night television history. Front pages everywhere were filled with questions regarding professionalism, about accountability that comes with holding a public stage, and about the very real repercussions of entertaining through cruelty. Jimmy Kimmel's own reputation never quite recovered from that evening. The faith he'd earned with audiences through years was shattered in a few agonizing minutes. But for Mark Wahlberg, something miraculous occurred. His reputation in Hollywood only became stronger, not because he lashed out, but because he did so with class, courage, and conviction. He reminded everyone that dignity still counts, even in an industry where that's easily forgotten. And in the end, that's what people remembered.